Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you, featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
Back in my day, to become an author, you had to master your craft. You needed a team that you could trust, a team that would never flinch in battle. Back in my day, you would risk losing your rights and pay outrageous amounts for terrible service. Well, yesterday is not today. Gladiator Publishing Company has a century-long reputation for defending writers and readers and winning awards for their record-setting low-cost services and market sales. They are 75 to 80% more cost-effective and never touch your royalties or copyrights. Go with a publisher that is so transparent that they have their contract on their webpage. Have your book treated with honesty, loyalty, and respect, period. Visit us at gladiatorpublishing.com or text us at 417-291-9162.
Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. Today my guest is Dave Thomas. Now, Dave Thomas has worked with the likes of Led Zepplin, Rod Stewart, Emerson Lake and Palmer, Fleetwood Mac, Chicago, the Greatful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, Jimi Hendrix, and the Doors. You know, even saying it is exhausting because what a fabulous opportunity he's had in his life. Not only does he do things with microphones, which is his business, he also plays in bands and plays, again, with amazing people. So before we talk about the rest of all the things that Dave does, I think I want to say welcome, Dave, to the Susan Brender Show.
Hi, Susan.
Well, good to have you on the show, Dave. It's not often that I interview people who are such successful entrepreneurs that in just a short time they're able to grow a company into what is now sounding like a big company. But what I find very interesting about you is you also work with some of the most important and interesting and exciting artists literally in the world. And I would like you to tell our audience a little bit about that. I mean, let me just mention some of the names before you do it, and that is Led Zepplin, Rod Stewart, Emerson Lake and Palmer, Fleetwood Mac, Chicago, the Greatful Dead. Wow, that's what a list. And what was it like to work with them? So, let's start again and say to you, tell us a little bit about your experience with all these major, major people.
Well, that was many years ago. That was in the very late 60s, and I had been working out of high school. I got a job working at the Vancouver School Board fixing film projectors and tape recorders and some microphones. And I did that for a couple of years, but I was really interested in music. Being able to, on my shortwave radio I built, being able to hear jazz coming out of New York and New Orleans and other kinds of music that you wouldn't hear on the normal AM radio station in Vancouver. And so I wanted to learn how to play a musical instrument. So, of course, I thought drums were the easiest thing because you just had to hit them, not realizing that it takes four independent, your 2 feet and your 2 arms are doing completely different things from each other. So anyway, I sort of played in this little band, and we played at a rock concert, an outdoor rock concert, and I ended up mixing the sound. It's one of those things in life where sometimes things just fall into your lap. And what had happened, the guy mixing the sound had really got into the hippie lifestyle and dropped acid before he had no idea what he was doing. He could have been mixing muffins. So I just sort of stepped in and started putting microphones up and mixing the sound. And then I got hired by that sound company because they said, man, you worked harder than anybody else. And they paid me $250 for the weekend. And now in 1968, that was a lot of money.
Sure.
So I ended up working for them, and then they used to do all backline. They would provide backline services for all the acts that came into Vancouver. So that allowed me the opportunity to set up sound systems and work with, all those people you mentioned. Now, this was, who knew that, you knew these were good musicians at the time, but you had no idea you were working, when Led Zepplin arrived in Vancouver, 1969, December, they'd played Portland, Oregon, and then they'd played Seattle with rented guitar amplifiers, but their new big Marshall guitar amps they'd purchased in the UK, in London, were shipped to Vancouver. And so when they arrived at the back door of the theater, as soon as they came up on stage, we noticed that they weren't going to work because they were wired for British. They had British plugs and they were wired for 220 volts. So Alex and I from the sound company rewired their Marshalls so they could actually play the dates, play that date. So that's how back then, it wasn't as organized as today. We didn't have the internet. You couldn't search Google and see, okay, what are the power requirements in Canada,
I hear you.
So everybody was kind of flying by the seat of their pants and trying to do the best they could.
I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Cadillac. It's called The Cadillac or The Cadillac something or other. I don't recall the whole name, but they talked all about like the Beatles and various other groups that came to these studios. And, you were talking about, trying to produce something. I mean, it was really at the beginning of so many incredible people and so much fabulous music. But that brings up a very big point. People, and young people in particular, Dave, they admire, more than admire, they almost follow these different people who are doing rap now and hip-hop. It's like a revolution that's going on in music. Now, you work with some of these amazing people, and today they have all, as I just mentioned, rap and hip-hop. Is the music for you, and I'm talking about you, Dave Thomas, is the music today, would you consider it wonderful and as good as the people whom you've worked with it before?
Well, there are some musicians out there that are, I would say, better. Like there's a young artist named Elise Trou, ELISETROUW, and she's very young. I don't know if she's still in her teens, but I've just only seen her on YouTube. And what's amazing is that she plays all these different instruments, and she plays them with the aid of a computer system called Appleton. So what it does, it samples. So she will play 4 bars of the bass line, and then it keeps playing that line. And then on top of that, she will, while that's playing, she'll play the guitar part, and then she will play the keyboard part. And then she starts to sing on top of it. And then she will play, after the 8-bar intro, then she will play 2 bars of drums, and that will be part of the loop. And then towards the end of the tune, after the vocals are finished, she will go and sit down on the drum kit and play an incredible drum kind of solo outro to the tune.
Wow.
So the technology, if you have, a talent like that, they can do things that we couldn't. You needed a band to do that, but she can create her own band, and she's quite successful. Now, the other part of today's technology is people who want to be a star, and they look the part and they act the part and they can dance the part. The computers today can fix pitch and that produces some of the new sounds. But some of the hip hop rhythms I really like. Actually, last night I was playing with a new friend I met who is from Spain, and she's Spanish, but she sings in Portuguese, and we were playing 3 bossa nova tunes. But we decided, just for fun, I just started playing kind of a little hip hop rhythm, and so the guitar player started playing started playing Summertime. And so we kind of did this kind of jazz hip-hop version of Summertime. and that I wouldn't have played that rhythm except I've heard it on a couple of a Jill Scott record I really like, which has got some hip hop jazz kind of things. So there are influences like the new music. I mean, I don't like to just have a steady diet of any one kind of music. I'm not going to listen to, even though I love jazz, I'm not going to listen to jazz all night long. Or, I want to hear. I like to hear variety. I love listening to my friend Maria Baboni in Portugal sing fado music, and I love Latin music as well. So I like all the different influences, and I think that there's a lot to be that you can get from the new kind of music, and there's a lot of things. There were some songs even back in the '60s that there were bands that I just I didn't particularly listen to or like. I just thought it was too pedestrian, or too. But I think as you listen to more and more music, you begin. I like classical too. And I love Debussy. And it was a funny story. There was an interview with Canadian artist. Now I've never met her. I've seen her play live 3 times. I've always been amazed. Joni Mitchell. And she was interviewed, and they asked her what her influences were. And the interviewer was expecting her to say Bob Dylan, Leonard Cohen, and she said Debussy and Stravinsky.
Isn't that wonderful?
So her peers, she classes herself with those kind of people, and she is that kind of a songwriter. And one of her albums she did in the 80s, which won a Grammy, she played with a large symphony orchestra in London, and her music works incredibly well. So, so people, even though she gets pegged, as a folk singer, she's more than that.
Yeah,
exactly. That's the, I like to hear all those different influences, and that's partly that reflects back to maybe why our microphone company has some success, is that I understand classical singers because I have a friend who's an opera singer, and I understand, I've mixed an album for a famous Vancouver punk band, and recorded it. And so I understand the visceral, part of that. And, and have been working, with fixing the amps on stage for the Doors, and Zeppelin, and all these other bands that I've heard all these influences, and and I know how they're going to use the microphone. I know they're going to scream into it, or.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned before the whole notion that today music has changed because it's being electronically done through technology. How is that going to change even further, and what do you see in the future for musicians?
Well, if we go back first to 1980, I worked on an album in my studio with an incredible. This guy is a true electronic genius. His name was Ralph Dyke. And Ralph designed in 1980 a computer that would play music. Like he could punch numbers into it, and that mathematical number would determine the length of the note, the pitch of the note, and the volume of the note. And then that computer was connected up to a synthesizer, and it would play it can play 8 notes at once. So it was polyphonic. It could play chord changes. And that became MIDI, musical instrument digital interface. And so what he said about it was that what he can do is what he hears and what he writes on the score, this will produce, the computer will produce it exactly. When you write a score and then you put it out in front of a group of musicians, they will interpret it their own way to a certain degree. They have to read the notes, but you never get from them exactly what you heard in your head when you wrote it down. He said, with a computer, I can get that.
Yeah. I hear you. This is one of the things that I always wonder about, and that is, when you take a musician who is really starting out at the beginning, and the competition is just absolutely, how do I even say it? It's just humongous. I mean, there's so many people who want to be musicians and want to have success, but they can't afford it. I mean, you put a band, you have to hire a studio, you have to do all kinds of things. And now, just the average person can get on the computer and they can work it all out. So what does that mean for a company like yours, or, for different studios in different places?
Well, the good thing for us is that, big recording mixers, analog mixers that you see pictures of are going the way of the dodo bird, because people can do all that in the computer. But you still need a microphone to capture the sound, no matter whether you're doing, hip-hop, opera, or country music. You still need to have a microphone to capture the vocal. You still get, people where there's a guitar player and a guitar amp, and you have to mic the guitar amp, and the acoustic guitar needs a mic on it. So and then the other part you still need is a speaker. But everything else between the microphone and the speaker has changed over the last 30, years or more.
Yeah.
So that's where, why microphones are still important, and they're important, especially when you're recording a big orchestra,
Right. You mentioned jazz. I happen to live in a place where there's an amazing club called the Arts Garage, which happens to be in Florida. And it turns out that when you listen to live music, there's something about live music that transforms you in ways you can't even describe. It's like this feeling that you want to get up and you want to dance, and maybe you also want to sing to it as well, or sing with them, because it just has that sort of flavor, the sense of, wow, look at them. And there are so many amazing musicians. I mean, drummers and jazz pianos, and you name it. Don't you think there is a real difference between music that is live and music that is not?
Definitely. The studio, once we started being able to multi-track, being able to record one part and then play it back and record a second part, then that changed, Now, it can be more creative, because in the recording process, you can do stuff in the studio that you couldn't possibly do live. An example is in 1953, a guy named Les Paul, very famous jazz guitar player and another, very smart electronics guy. There was I can't remember. I think it was I'm trying to think of the particular song, and I can't remember the name of it. Might be "Fly Me." No, it's not "Fly Me to the Moon." But it's a super fast tempo, and anyway, he recorded this in '53, and then somebody I worked with, Jeff Skunk Baxter from the Dewey Brothers, was in my studio recording, and he told me a story. He said, yeah, Les did this tune that was really, really fast. And we had him on a TV show with the Dewey Brothers. And he said, Les, let's do this tune. Because it took me 3 months to learn how to play it. He actually, when he was, in his teens, went down in the basement and practiced for days and days, 3 months before he could play the guitar part to the song. And Les turned to him and said, I can't play that song that fast. He said, I tuned my guitar down and I turned the speed of the tape machine down. That forced Jeff to learn how to play it that fast.
Exactly. But, he invented the electronic guitar, didn't he?
He invented the electric guitar by putting, a pickup kind of on a log and putting some string in it, because he was playing in a restaurant that was very narrow and long. And he said the people in the back of the restaurant couldn't hear my acoustic guitar, so he put a mic on it, but mics still weren't very good back then. So that's how he finally came up with the idea and built an electric guitar. And then he ran it into an amp, an old radio actually. But people at the back of the restaurant could hear him, and he'd get more tips, he'd get more money.
So oh boy! So this industry. probably is one of the most important industries in the whole world. Now, music touches everybody in so many different ways, and whether it is Portuguese, singing Brazilian music, whether it is classical, whether it is hip-hop, you name it, but everybody seems to appreciate it. It's so much. I mean, what would you do? This is something I've thought about. If there was no music in the world, what would you do? How would you?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess you'd have to have some other artistic way of expressing yourself, with painting or, some other medium,
Think about this for a moment. Think you have music in movies, which sometimes it's the music that actually sells the movie. If it's really great music, people just, it resonates with them. And then it's people walking on the streets and they're doing exercise and they have the little things stuck in their ear and they're listening to music, and it kind of makes them, gives them an opportunity to kind of walk as fast as they can because they're following the sounds of the music. And when you talk about classical music, I mean, you think about all these different places where classical music is performed, and again, you see people like in Tanglewood in western Massachusetts, how wonderful it is, and here in your part of the country, which is California, you have the bowl, and again, it's perfect. It's just a perfect way to end your day, to start your day, to be in the middle of the day. So you're involved in a really great, really, really great industry. Now, give me a story. I want to hear a story from you of something that you found either funny or very interesting. You must have a lot of stories, I'm sure.
Yeah, several stories. I can tell you which is funny and interesting. My point is that I'd worked with Katie Lang in 1985, and we did. She sang on a song for a video called "Open Your Heart," and it was to raise money for Oxfam. I'm really in Canada, not in California. I'm in Western Canada, but. So this was to raise money for starving kids in Africa. So we had her in, and it was an amazing experience because I opened the fader up on the mixer. And she was singing, and just her voice, the hair stood up on my arm. It was like so. Her voice just captures you. So 3 years later, she went into my studio with Roy Orbison and recording "Crying." Which was a Grammy, but I wasn't there. I was in L.A. At the time. I was buying equipment for a cartoon series we got through the studio. So when I came back to the studio, the guy said, "Guess who was in here recording?" And I couldn't guess it was Roy Orbison. I never believed he would come into my studio I built in Vancouver. So I didn't believe him. And then about a year later, the Grammy Award came, because the studio gets a Grammy too. Sure. So I missed meeting and being there and in my studio, but I got to hear the record, and I actually got to talk to Katie Lang about it 25 years later. I went to see her play about 3 years ago, and so her musical director is a friend of mine, so we got to meet her, and she said, "Wow, I don't remember you, Dave." And I said, "Well, Katie, I wouldn't remember you if you weren't famous, because it was 25 years ago. We've all got older." And she said, "But Dave, I certainly remember being in your studio and having Roy Orbison sing into my ear." And that was pretty amazing. And then 2 years after that, I was in Germany doing a trade show showing my microphones, and across from me is a competitor microphone company. And Dusty Wakefield is the owner. And he's also partnered up with another really great tech engineer, guy named David Royer, who builds a different kind of microphone, a ribbon microphone. And so Dave and I always just talk. We're both members of the Audio Engineering Society for I've been a member since 1975. So even though we're competitors, we just talk about circuits. We're just electronic geeks. And so I said, "Is Dave here?" And he said, "No, he doesn't want to. He doesn't travel that far. He doesn't like to come all the way to Europe. So, and then we started chatting, Dusty and I. And then he found, and I told him I had Ocean Sound, and he said, "You had Ocean Sound in Vancouver. You built Ocean Sound." And I said, "Yeah, that was my studio in Vancouver." He said, "I recorded Katie Lang in your studio."
Oh, wow.
So I had to go all the way to Germany to meet the guy, and then he told me the backstory. And the other funny part of the story is, so he has these very German distributors, and now he's over at my booth, and we've got pictures of me and Dusty at my booth, and me and Dusty at his booth, and so they go, Dusty, we must speak, because he's now consorting with the enemy, we're the competitors. And he turns around them and he goes, later, guys, we have history, we have a connection. So it's the music, the music, with musicians, the music gives you get more of a connection from the music and working than the business kind of goes, we both do good business, but we're more interested in that experience. How did that come about? What happened?
What happened to Katie Lang?
Well, she's still performing. She's just, as we all get a little older, if you want to take care of your health on tour, you reduce the amount of touring you do. You just can't keep up because you don't know what city you're in. You leave, like she, by the time they pack the bus and she's on her way, it's 1 or 2 in the morning. So you don't know, you don't see this, you don't know where you are, So she doesn't tour as much as she did, although she's still. And this was a really unique tour because she did all these little 300-seat theaters across Canada and into the States, and so it was more a very intimate audience, which you really like. So
sure.
I have a neighbor here who's a very famous musician, Paul Rogers from Bad Company and a band called Free before that, and he still goes out on tour. But again, he limits. They could turn him into, they could be paparazzi around him, but he doesn't live the rock and roll lifestyle. In my little town, we see Paul go through the checkout counter at the grocery store and kayaking down the lake, and But then a day before tour, he's got like the rock and roll scarf on and he, a new jacket that his wife's bought him, and off he goes, to tour.
Sure.
So I think that the promoters and the manager would love to see their artists out there, every week performing. But I think you have to balance that.
Yeah, and I think that musicians and actors and people who are, really well known, people think that there's something unique and special about them, but we're all humans, and maybe this particular person is very famous and makes quite a bit of money, but when it comes down to it, it's just we're all the same. Somebody has talent and somebody just doesn't. So
extremely lucky, like you there's lots of talented people, and they didn't make it. It's just that there was John Glenn, a famous recording engineer. He recorded Led Zeppelin's first album, and he said it was completely by fluke. Like he'd recorded many other things. He'd recorded a couple of tunes for the Beatles. He'd recorded the Steve Miller Band. Before this, he'd recorded Procol Harum, and Led Zeppelin, Jimmy Page, and was a busy studio musician in London. They booked the studio for 2 weeks, and no other engineer could do it. And his schedule was just that he went in and recorded that album, and it became famous, because it's a new kind of, what kind of rock and roll would be in '68 to what rap is, like it was a different direction. It was rock and roll and blues kind of combined, and some of it is just timing. You just happen to actually, John Glenn said the other thing too is when he got his first job in a recording studio, he was just looking for a job, and he knew a fair bit about music. He played piano and he sang in a choir, and he didn't know what he was going to do with his life, and so he called up the studio, and he went there with a resume, but he knew nothing about recording. But then 2 weeks later, he called them back, and he said, did you, is there any openings? And the guy said, wow, the chief engineer, he just resigned today, and so we need somebody to start at the bottom of the ladder because everybody got moved up.
Sure.
And that was it. He said if he hadn't called on that day, they would have filled it with somebody else, And so for the first few months, I was serving coffee and, cleaning up, And that's one of the jokes we make in the studio business is that until you know how to make great coffee, coffee keeps everybody going in the studio.
That is right.
Or in England, they call him a tea boy. You start out as a tea boy.
Sometimes people think it's sort of fate. Being at the right place at the right time is such an important thing, and who knows when it really is the right time. But a lot of different musicians who have become very famous, they have a skill which is so incredible and so special that they do stand out, and that's why maybe they're successful. But I want to wind up on a few different things. And first of all, we talked about electronics in general. Now, are our young people in the schools, are they teaching electronics, and is that something that is going to, be important for them in order to get jobs, or is there another, let's call it another skill that they must have? What's your thoughts about that?
Well, I think computer skills today are very, very important. I was just in Mexico doing, and of course I'm sort of, it's kind of our vacation place, but really I'm working on the internet there, and I just get away from the great white north, from the cold and the snow so I kind of missed the winter this year, which was just wonderful. So I wanted to do some recording down there, but I don't have my, here I've got more of an analog big mixing console, and it's a digital recorder, but it acts like it's big. It acts like a tape machine. So I didn't have that down there, and so I'm using a computer program that I bought, and I can answer emails on the computer, but I've not. I actually ran into a guy who was Mexican and whose English is incredibly, and we hit it off talking about microphones and music and my experiences and his new experiences. So he came over and he gave me a lesson on running this program called Logic in the computer. So that's what the young kids are. They've got great computer skills, and so I was able to go out and make a great recording of this band. I wouldn't be able to do it on my own. It would have taken me all 4 months to figure out what was going on with the computer. So I think that's important. But I think there's still people who are interested in electronics. I know how I got interested in electronics was I joined a ham radio club when I was 12. And so I don't know if that goes on anymore.
It does. My husband is involved in that, and there are thousands of people still interested in ham radio, which is a wonderful thing to learn, and it's a great hobby. And
that's how I learned. I had to learn about electronics to get my license. Basic circuits, and I still know Morse code. I don't think we need it today. But I remember in 1960, I think it was 64. They had the 63, the last earthquake. Yeah. And the only communications they had after the earthquake were by ham radio, like operators sending messages back and forth, and we would get calls, and then we'd have somebody's name and their family's phone number. And then we would call up their family and say, okay, we just heard from your son or your daughter or your brother. They're okay, But that was the only communication. There was no email back then. There was certainly.
Yeah, they didn't have any of that. All right. No. Well, we're going to have to end the show. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you feel would be important for people to know?
Well, the other thing is what we do in our company is that we will take old circuits, like the original tube microphones that sounded so good on many recordings from Sinatra through to through to modern people, are still using those mics, but we're able to reproduce that circuitry, but with modern components. So our versions of those microphones are actually quieter and more rugged, and the components are more accurate. Because of computers today, computers make all the electronic components, and
sure.
So you get 1% tolerances where you had 10 to 20% back in the 60s. So that's today we can build equipment. If you're someone like me who likes the analog circuit, people want to kind of build everything into the computer, but we're working on a digital microphone that will plug right into your. But USB doesn't work so well. Like a single mic, it might work for a blogger, but as soon as you have two microphones, like we're doing an interview,
yeah,
they won't clock. They won't talk to each other correctly. They won't be in sync or in step with each other. So you can only use one mic. So anyway, we're working with another company, the Gaston Ward Beck, who we were there with at the NAB the NAB show, on a digital microphone that will be more broadcast quality. So
it's fantastic. Well, if people want to get in touch with you, and if they want to learn a little bit about your microphones and your company and what you can do with all the different electronics that you're working with, how do they do that?
You just simply go on to aamicrophones.com. So 2 A's, microphones with plural, .com, and that'll go right to our website.
My guest has been Dave Thomas, who is, as I said, an incredible person who's started a company from scratch and has actually worked with some of the most important people in the music business in the world. And he's full of all kinds of stories. So if you have a chance, get on his website and take a look at what he's done. And if you want to get in touch with him, I think he's available to speak to about microphones and various other stories. So, Dave Thomas, thank you for being on the Susan Brender Show. It was really great listening to you.
Oh, thank you for inviting me, Susan. It was a real pleasure. What I can find out about people involved with autism, and who would be good people to do an interview with. I'm sure some of the rappers, the people they know, they may not know Paul Rodgers because he's my age and he's been, unless they've listened to, rock and roll music over the years, they probably more, something like Drake or, and one of the there's some amazing. I watch the Tonight Show, the Trevor Nolan Trevor show, and he has a lot of hip hop artists on his show, and some of them are, you get a different image of who you think a rapper is, and then these guys come on the show and they've taken the money they have and they've got all kinds of causes they're supporting. They're really they're really worried about society, and they're really out there trying to help. So
yeah. Well, if you could think of somebody who, certainly we would love younger people like rap artists and hip-hop people, all of those.
Well, I think one of them, there's a Sarah McLaughlin in Vancouver is an artist that would be, she put a music school together, and I don't know if they have any autistic kids there, but it's quite possible.
Yeah.
I don't know her personally, but my good friend was her guitar player, and I'm seeing him in a week or so. He's
that's great. He would be fantastic.
3 days.
And if he could get it there, oh my God, we love that. The kids with autism, they're high school and college kids, and I think that they would have an amazing, because they're going to do the interview. I mean, they're the ones who are doing the interview, and we're very excited about it because, we feel like we're doing something very good for them.
Oh, yeah. I think they seem to, they just learn in a different way,
It's true.
we all learn in a different way. I learn by more by example or by watching rather than like teacher puts stuff on the board and you copy it down, but that I always learn more by building the circuit and then looking, oh, okay, that's what happens,
Sure.
This is where the voltage changes here, and so I'm more of a practical, the same way, I play drums as I watch other people play, and I listen, and I can read music, but not fast enough to play,
You're lucky,
now, I suppose if I practice that, but
right.
But I'm not sure if I'm that would be maybe a waste of my time, to get to that. Like I'm not like I work with Paul Horn, and I said the guy could sight read perfectly, and there are lots of guys that can do that, can sight read, but he could transpose it into a different key, but just by.
It's really
but he said you had to do that to,
how many
play
talented persons right around.
Yeah, he was incredible. He would, unfortunately, he's passed away, but he would be a lovely person for them to interview.
Well, think about
because he hung out with the Beatles and played his flute in the Taj Mahal, and he did all this transcendental music later in life.
Well, I'll tell you what's going to go on. I'm meeting with the people at ELS, which is the School for Excellence for Kids with Autism, and I'm going to meet them on Friday, and we're going to talk all about doing a program with all of their kids. So anyway, as I said, anything that you feel that you could afford.
Well, if I come up with somebody that I will I'll send it in an email to you. I can't think who it was we were talking about the other day, because we were talking about autism and a friend's daughter and some other.
Sure.
So I'll try to think who it might be, and you could maybe they could get in contact with them. Yeah.
All right. So we're going to be a nonprofit. We're going to be a 501c3. So anything. As I said before. Besides people who they can interview, we're trying to raise as much as we can. I mean, not a lot, but just as much. So, whatever you think.
All right. I'll look into it and I'll shoot you an email over the next few days.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much. I'm so glad.
Okay. Well, thank you. It was great talking with you, and thanks for doing this interview for us.
Oh, it was my pleasure. All righty. Take care now.
All right. Bye-bye, Susan.
Okay, bye.
Thank you for listening to The Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.